at Total Energies Uganda, and she is responsible for ensuring that there is inclusion and maximization of national content participation in the Tilenga project activities. To date, I see an estimated 139 Uganda suppliers engaged in representing a combined value of $297 million US. So that is big. The lady here is the one you should ask any questions around the Tilenga project. She's worked in the legal and supply chain management space in the oil and gas sector for 12 years. So she has 12 years experience, including international experience in Paris, working very closely with the rest of the Total team in the contracting processes for the FEED, the RAP, enabling infrastructure, early works contracts, and so on. Pamela, you're most welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. All protocol observed, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be part of this conference, and I'm a bit nervous, but actually excited to speak to you all regarding an area that I'm passionate about, but also I know is a huge contributor to what we are talking about today, which is maximizing national content and seeing how to retain that value out of what we have achieved. I spend lots of hours together with Rosette brainstorming how to actualize this and take it out of the academic field. What I've been asked to do is to share with you experience having run lots of procurements on what typical challenges we have observed from different parties participating in our procurement process, and give you practical tips on how best to engage better with not just Total Energies, but generally the oil and gas licenses. So I'll start by I'll borrow what I've actually listened to. So just to set the scene, when it comes to procurement, you notice that so many contracts have been awarded. I won't go over all the statistics because this has been shared by previous speakers, especially our regulator, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. What I want to emphasize is that as Total Energies, I think even before the national content was, I would say, legislated, it was a passion, and this is seen through our processes, to ensure that we engage Ugandan firms that are qualified to support our work in Uganda. Why? One, we know that we have a social responsibility to make sure that we don't just develop oil fields, but we have an impactful change. But also, too, in fairness, it is cheaper and more logical to use farms at our own ground than to look for foreign entities that will have huge markups. So all this is to say that in sharing these tips, it's not academic. We are very interested to see as much as possible participation of Ugandan farms in what? In providing goods and services, in engaging with us to improve on our initiatives that are skilling Ugandans through capacity building programs. So that said, I'll now get into, because I have only 15 minutes. Just move. Uh-oh. Perfect. So what I'm projecting here is what I pick up. And by no means, I'm not looking to be exhaustive. I'm not looking to be prescriptive in how you run your companies. It's just to give you a flavor, to trigger thought, and probably have some improvement. I pick up a question that was asked some time back. Are the activities in oil and gas focused within the oil and gas region? No, because I can tell you when we are running the procurement process, We do not inquire which region you're from, not at all. We're actually looking to see whether you can deliver what we're looking for. So I'll start off. Typically, we have seen that most of the submissions we receive are inadequate or insufficient, and I'll qualify that. What does that mean? Missing information. So normally what we do, we structure our needs in what we call instructions, and then ask you to address those needs in writing. Most of the submissions sometimes we receive are missing most of the information we have asked for, or they're answering to something totally different. So we take it maybe that you were in a hurry and you had to kind of beat the deadline. Or worst of it all, we have experienced this where someone submits a bid to Total Energies but meant to send it to CNOC, something like that. So at this point, we are our hands are tied up as to what to do. Sometimes we will clarify in as much as possible, but I can tell you this in a way has impacted participation of farms. And I won't say just Ugandan farms, but on the whole. I'm sorry, I can't see. It's a bit far. Sorry, I'm just going to open this on my phone because I can't see that far. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to say here, typical challenges is if you could, in putting together your bid preparations, we actually read them. So if you could take the time to put together comprehensive bids. Now, we normally have the instructions quite clearly laid out, but if you don't understand them, do not hesitate to engage. So that brings me to the next point. We have noticed that there's a lack of proactive engagement by bidders during the process. When we send out the instructions, and we do this using online platforms to ease access, we do not hear from any of the bidders most times until the submission time. I want to demystify that. The more you engage us, the most likely you'll understand the scopes much faster. We have contacts in most of our bid documentation in email or telephone contacts. Do not hesitate to reach out to us. I want to emphasize that quite a bit, because oftentimes we note that there is a lack of engagement due to a perceived fear that I don't quite get. So I would really encourage you to do that, because it will help us to quickly also pick up if the documentation is not properly worded. The next one is really to also emphasize, then once you even engage, we have noted that there is a missing link between how you understand the scopes and how you go ahead to structure the methodology of how you're going to get the work done and all the other aspects of the tender. We understand that most of the farms here are very technically driven. So in terms of, I suppose, bid preparation, you focus more on understanding the technical aspects, but unfortunately miss out the heart of Total Energies, which is national content. So we know that you're good at what you do, but we want to understand, okay, how are you going to get it done in line with our objectives as we set them out in the bids, with aspects like national content, community inclusion. That actually is the X factor most times in the bids. We are driven towards bids that are technically qualified and have taken the time to demonstrate how they are going to participate within the communities that they are going to work. Do you have drives, for example, to recruit casual laborers from the communities that you're going to work in, or are you going to pick them up from the headquarters of your companies? Do you have any capacity building initiatives you would think of that could, whilst you're performing the service, also benefit the community that you're going to be working in? That really is normally the X factor when, for example, you have comparable bids. We are driven to move more towards awarding such companies because they are driving the conversation not just for now, but also for the future. So now regarding contraction and compliance, I highlight this for purposes of improvement tips. We have noted that for whatever reason, preparation of participating in most of the procurement commences when the bid is launched. So I wanted to just share with you typically what delays most bidders, one, to participate, but even when they do, to remain competitive. Our bids have a section between understanding the technical aspects, having a look at the safety, social, biodiversity, and health aspects that relate to the scope. After that, how do you understand the maximization of national content in performing the scope? And lastly, how have you priced all that? Contractually, this is what we look at. In fact, it never changes from one bid to the other. So you can imagine if you prepared your company to have this on hand, that when you receive a bid, you already have a folder that you just pick, drop, and make a few tweaks to fit what is being asked. You've already covered almost 10 to 15% of the bid. We noted that for example, timely filing of tax returns is a problem. Complying with social security requirements is a problem, but as Total Energies, it's imperative that these are addressed, one, for compliance, two, we are very big on working conditions. So if you can address some of the aspects that I'm projecting right now, you'd actually have your technical bid locked in. I'll touch a little bit on the National Supplier Development database. It's important that you don't just get your company registered, but keep that valid. In other words, keep in touch with the regulator to make sure that you have updated information, and at the same time, the registration is current. I lastly touch on the point of joint ventures. This was spoken to by the Executive Director of the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. Joint ventures is one of the key areas we are really encouraging most of the bidders through our workshops, through one-on-ones, to look into. Now, there is a misconception sometimes that joint ventures are merely to capacity build local companies with foreign entities that would like to come into this market. Actually, joint ventures is, for me, one of the vehicles that is going to maximize national content. Why? Because the industry we're working in is very risky, it's high-end in terms of value. So even with a company that has been working in the industry for a while, you will need that boost. So having joint ventures and thinking about who would be the best person to work with might go a long way to actually get you onto bidder lists much faster. So now I've been touching on the improvement tips as I went along, but maybe what I haven't touched on is a bid management team. I know it looks obvious, but we have seen this being the biggest problem. What do I mean? Most of the participants that submit bids, you can tell that one person sat down and tried their best to understand what is required and try to put together a bid document that's competitive. I don't think that's the best business way to do it. The truth is, if you had a dedicated team that understands how to put together bids, that coordinates, you'd be able to put together a competitive bid on time. That's an improvement tip I would suggest. I've seen some people do it, and we have some success stories around it, and they're much more structured, and specialization also helps to keep up the quality. Well, the next tip is quite obvious. I share it to demystify the fact that we always go for the lowest bid. Not necessarily, because we have other considerations. As I mentioned, national content is one of those. If we have two bidders in the running for an award, and one of them has a higher national content, and the price difference between the two bids is 5%, we'll go with the one with a higher national content score and plan and commitments. So in other words, when you are pricing, you need to keep in mind the profit margin that you're going to top up on your bid, one, should be well thought out, but two, should be clearly sectioned for us to see how you've apportioned your costs across board. Oftentimes, the misconception that the lowest bid is what will be taken drives poorly developed bids, which unfortunately we cannot award. I will not read out everything because it's all written out, but what I want to close off, because this is something dear to us as Total Energies, is that the maximization of national content is a joint effort. In order for us to include as many players as possible, we need you to, one, have a look at all the bids that we advertise, and we do this systematically in all the media that we have. Please respect the timelines, because we are trying to run something that is transparent but also fair across board. And then when you do participate, please read the documentation. If you're stuck, you know, our offices are on Coastview Towers, Yusufule Road. Come to the 5th floor and say, look, I don't understand your English, break it down for me. We have a whole team around that. And lastly, when you do get the opportunity to submit the bid, keep note that every aspect in our bids is important. It's not only about price. National content is equally important, and we are driven to see that actualized in what we do. So I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Pamela, my namesake. I guess those were very useful points for us. And my key takeaway is let's engage. When Total sends out a tender request, it's not a death sentence. Let's go and speak to them and find out exactly what they want us to submit. And they are available to support us. So we are turning to the panel. And I would like to introduce the members on the panel. We have Mr. Brian Kisita, who is a senior associate at Kasirye Biarahanga and Company Advocates, and he will be representing the lawyers as he speaks to us around the legal and regulatory framework and how sufficient that is for purposes of promoting value retention. We have Brian, you can wave so that we know who you are. We have Mr. Derek Natumanya. Derek is the COO for ICS Engineering and Environment Limited. I'm going to read your bios in brief without going into detail, given we don't have much time, but ICS is working closely with Ruli on the pipeline project. So they have experience from that perspective, and he will be sharing his experience from practical perspective of joint ventures and partnerships. We have Mr. Morris Amogola. Mr. Morris Amogola is the CEO for Minet Uganda, a Pan-African firm specializing in insurance and risk management, as well as human capital solutions. Minet has been with the chamber for a long time, since we started this oil journey and since they started operating here in Uganda. And he'll be speaking to the insurance requirements and whether those are fit for purpose with where we are in development of our national content as well as value retention. The fourth panelist, we have a lady on the panel, Ms. Victoria Kayemba. She's the current sector head for oil and gas at Stanbic Bank Uganda. Victoria has over 15 years working experience with various institutions, including Ernst & Young, Standard Chartered Bank, and now at Stanbic Bank. She will be giving us a perspective from the banking side of things. The earlier panel mentioned that there is challenges around financing and our local players being able to access finance and prepare themselves to participate in joint ventures. So she will be talking about the financing perspectives and how they can support our local service providers. And then on the panel still we have Mr. Nick Tuma, who is currently the Human Resource Manager for East and Southern Africa for Schlumberger. And Schlumberger has been here through the exploration phase. They're here with us in the development phase. They're actually doing some work on the Tilenga project. So they will talk about capacity in country and how we can support specialized services, locals in specialized services such as drilling, well completions, and the like. Okay, I have been informed, Pamela, apologies, you'll need to step back on the platform so that you can respond to any questions that the team here may have. I think that's a brilliant idea because I'm sure there are a number of people that have questions for Total Energies. So if you will please come back and take your seat. All right, so I'll kick off this discussion with a question to you, Derek. The earlier panel talked about practicality of partnerships, joint ventures, value retention from that perspective. Could you share the experience you have had as ICS in that area, and particularly what you think needs to be done to facilitate practical and meaningful partnerships?
Thank you very much, Pamela. And I will begin with maybe giving it context that ICS Engineering and Environment Limited is an engineering consulting firm that has been in Uganda for quite some time and that had a pedigree mainly in infrastructure and all other facets of engineering. And when oil and gas became a big factor in Uganda, ICS took a strategic decision to take the direction of oil and gas. And we took a number of decisions in looking out for partners. And we are proud to say we have been fairly successful so far in what we've done. And bringing it now much into perspective to your question, there have been three major challenges in the entire oil and gas issue with national content. And these have been mainly around financial capacity of the local firms, technical capacity, and then organizational capacity. And a number of studies that have been done previously to address these have had some recommendations, which included right sizing of contracts to fit the companies and the local firms, a longer duration of contracts to give predictability for some of the companies that have been participating, fair payment terms in the work done to enable these companies now match some of these issues, then waiving off of performance guarantee requirements or even lowering these requirements to fit the local demands of these firms. There was also a recommendation around putting these contracts in a framework contract nature that will enable these firms to participate. And now the other reason, or what we are talking about now with the other recommendation that has come out clearly, is now joint ventures. And not just joint ventures, if you go to the technical understanding of what joint ventures are, it talks about the entire span of joint ventures, or call them associations, or call them partnerships, or maybe some call them joint operations, depending on the type it is. And by far, these, everyone has talked about them in the earlier presentation by the ED at PAU, Mr. Rubondo. He emphasized the need for these partnerships. And for sure, they work, especially maybe in two ways. One is the international partnerships, like the one you just described, where we are with Wally in a partnership to deliver the big project on the pipeline. But also there's the concept of now local partnerships, working with local companies in whichever way it will be structured. And the good news we bring from ICS is we've been privileged to participate in both kinds of joint ventures, both at international level with global companies as their local partners, but also as with other local firms to make sure we maximize this value with other local firms in bidding for jobs here. And the advantages are obvious, just like we explained, addressing the three major factors I mentioned at first. One, you benefit synergies from financial capacity, because, and I will focus more on the local kind of partnerships, because I believe the advantages that accrue with the international partnerships are almost clear. Because ideally, when you end up working with an international partnership, it rubs off the way you work, and I won't focus on that. Working with Wally, working with Total on the same system, you must change your value chain to make sure you match their standard, and that so far has been the biggest advantage that we've had as ICS, that you work with Wally and you're working on the same platform. It means if you're talking about your IT systems, they have to be aligned. If you're talking about your internal security, So the entire value chain has had to be changed to match those international standards. And for us, we believe as ICS, that will never leave us the same again. And we believe that the value we are gaining from oil and gas, the standard levels we are coming to participating in oil and gas, we will now move it to other sectors, like transportation sector, where we've been very strong, and we believe that will bring value stronger. Now, coming to the other big advantage of technical capacity still in the local perspective, you'll have, looking at the technical capabilities, joining two companies, if, for example, you're bidding for a project that has environment and engineering, one company is stronger in environment, the other is stronger in engineering, definitely you've addressed that challenge. So local partnerships address these three major issues and major challenges that we mentioned at the start. And from our perspective, this has been very successful. When one is strong, the other one is weak at any time. So, when one is weak, the other one is stronger. So the partnerships have brought the synergies in all the three areas I mentioned above. Coming to what can be done better, of course, emphasizing the points that have already been made around partnerships. One is increased awareness and understanding that this cake, this bread that's before us as a country, I think the PAU ED put it in great perspective that we are getting contracts of a size that we've never seen here. So it's big enough for all of us. And the awareness for minds of Ugandan companies to appreciate that joint ventures is the way to go. No one will eat the cake alone and finish it. The awareness and such discussions to encourage these companies to be open to working and partnering with competitors to be able to push now this better. And we will be stronger in that way. So the awareness should be increased. The next point may be around the discipline for the players that are participating, especially around prudent financial management. Because as local firms, and we must thank the banking, the financial sectors and all, there has been majorly a positive force around financing and all other factors. So companies are going to have access to this finance, and just by presenting a contract, you'll have access to finance because banks are willing to give this money. So we would encourage all these companies that will be involved in these joint ventures that they need to be prudent in financial management and disciplined, not to abuse the kind of grace that is being extended by these banks. Then the other point would be around clear partnership
maybe Derek,
agreements.
I'll pause you there so that I can come back to you shortly after I have posed a question to Stanbic on the financing side now that you're going to that aspect. But ladies and gentlemen, the point that I would like to make is the panelists, you realize the panelists have been specially selected so that we can learn from people that have experiences and are putting into implementation the things that we're talking about. Pamela earlier was talking about some of the things that they're facing in the bidding process, the challenges that they have seen. We've talked about partnerships since morning. So for those of us that are struggling with some of those aspects, partnerships, different aspects that we've talked about this morning, just mark the faces and have the conversations. The importance of being here today is to make sure that we are maximizing the information, but also the contacts that we get out of here. So I like what Derek has been sharing in terms of what they are doing as ICS, and let's engage. So I'll ask a question to you, Victoria, from the banking side perspective, because earlier, I think it was Veronica who talked about the fact that locals are struggling with financing as well as packaging themselves to look appealing to the banks. From a Stanbic Bank perspective, and probably from a wider perspective of financial institutions, how are banks positioning themselves to support the local service providers with financing, considering that we all want to participate, we want those partnerships, but we are struggling to get the financing? Can you tell us how we can de-risk ourselves as subcontractors and local service providers?
much, Pamela, for that question. Obviously, it is a very challenging question, given that the different people in the room have different experiences with the different banks. But before I answer that question, I'll just paint for you the picture of how a traditional bank thinks. In the mind, what goes on in the mind of a traditional banker when a contractor or a subcontractor approaches them for financing. So traditionally, a bank will think about the 5 C's of credit. Does this client have the capacity to repay the loan? And that is, are the cash flows positive? Do they have sufficient revenues? Do they have enough capacity in terms of servicing whatever contract they have? The banker will think through what their secondary source of repayment will be. Does the client have collateral to back up in case this contract fails? Is there a backup and for the bank to fall back to? The character of the borrower, what is your credit history like as an individual, as a company, your willingness to pay, what is said of your management style out there in the market. And then capital. In the banks, we love to call it, what skin do you have in the game? What are you putting down as your own contribution for this contract or for this job that you have won? Then lastly, the conditions. Do the conditions favor you? How is the contract? Is it favoring you? Have you negotiated properly, and will you get value out of it? So given what's happening, especially in the oil and gas industry, the traditional banking thinking has been challenged greatly, and especially the fact that the national content is protected. You find that it's a requirement for every contract to have some national content. So you find that the companies that are winning these contracts do not really tick the boxes of how a traditional banker thinks. For example, you find that someone is winning a contract that is 20 times more what they've been able to do before. They do not have, the capacity. When you look at them, maybe they've had 5 trucks before, and the contract is asking for 50 trucks. Then the high standards that the employers look out for, you find that the contractor or the subcontractor has a very small balance sheet that cannot, if you start analyzing using financial metrics in a bank, you cannot even add 1 more shilling to that person. So we've found ourselves facing this kind of thing, and we've had to ask ourselves, how differently can we support the clients in this sector? How can we think outside the box? Because if someone just has their house that is probably valued at 300 million, and the contract is $5 million, how are you going to get that collateralized? So as banks, we've had to start reasoning differently and seeing how best can we support. And also the other thing that I want to bring out is many times the employers give out a contract that is asking for a performance guarantee. Remember, I have just described to you the kind of company. It's a small company, but the employer has, trusted them with this huge contract and has requested for a performance guarantee from the bank. Now the question is, how do the banks satisfy themselves about the performance of this contract? Because the guarantee is going to be called once the contractor does not perform. And that means the whole risk now lies on the bank. So the banks have to find a way of satisfying themselves or seeing how this performance risk is mitigated. So because of the high perceived risk to financial institutions, due to the nature of the national content players that are coming through, they've had to face challenges around high cost of financing and some resistance from the banks in terms of lending them. So I'll then talk about what are some of the things that how have the banks positioned themselves, or what are the banks thinking through in supporting these contractors. First of all, as banks, we have to understand the challenges faced by these companies, the nature of them, and then see how to rely on the contracts and be able to structure facilities following the contracting cycle and making sure that we follow through each step of the way. For example, because the contracting cycle it goes all the way from bidding to award of the contract, to contract execution, and to completion of the contract. So the banks have had to find ways of making sure they give bite-sized facilities in line with the project milestones of the different companies. I'll give you an example. If a company has a contract to, let's say, provide transportation services, the first bit would be to mobilize trucks to be able that they're on site to be ready for the work. So then the bank has to think through, how do I, because the contract can be $20 million, but it has several milestones. So how do you break it down to make sure that you're not overly exposed, and that at each point you're servicing and supporting the client. So you can help the client mobilize up to a certain point in time, and thereafter give short-term financing based on the cash flow cycle, and also rely on the anchors, the employers, for the repayment. Many times we would love, and if this was possible, to work together with the bigger contract employers, because these are people that are trusted. So how do we work together to make sure that we monitor together these contracts, getting of progress reports, and ensuring that at the end of the day, everyone wins? Because if we are to think traditionally, then it will become very difficult to support the local content.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thanks, Victoria. And I'll turn to Slumbergel now. Nick, I know one of the aspects that Mr. Rubondo talked about earlier was the fact that they're starting to see local companies and individuals play from the inner circle, moving away from the indirect services to the direct service type of work. From your experience working in those technical aspects of the oil and gas sector, is there capacity in country to support such specialized services like drilling, well completions? And as Slumbergel, is there anything that you have done to build capacity and transfer technology in that space?
Thank you very much, Pamela, for the question. So when it comes to respond to your question on whether there's capacity in country, I would say there is a lot of potential in country for people to get into the specialized services. And the reason I say that is, since we had the FID signed on February 1st, I've been on a few calls with Ugandan business owners and their joint venture partners or strategic partners from other countries, Nigeria, Pakistan, who are looking at being subcontract for us for some of the services that we're offering with the Tilenga package. So I would say, to piggyback on what the ED of PAU said, is we as the Ugandans, we need to be ready to do the joint ventures and to partner with some of these people who have the technical capabilities and probably also the financing muscle that is needed to make these strategic partnerships go ahead. To your question on whether what Slumbergel is doing in Uganda to develop these strategic partnerships, the number one thing that we always look at is whether it makes sense for the business. And right now, since we're still in the mobilization stage, we're still thinking around that. However, we have made a lot of strategic partnerships in Nigeria, and we have a lot of joint ventures with companies that we work with in Nigeria. Some do maintenance for us, drilling, different sorts of services, and we are looking to doing the same in Uganda. And what we will be doing later on going on would be holding supplier dialogues where we can share with the Ugandan community where the opportunities could be. And if there are those who have partnerships already with companies from abroad, we can still engage with them, have conversations, tell them what the scope of our work is now and where the possible potential is for them to join hands with us. Just further to add to that, on one of the other things that we're also doing on developing local capacity is local hiring. And this is underlined by 3 main items. The first one is we hire where we work. So we are hiring a lot of Ugandans, fresh from the universities and also experienced professionals that we are bringing in. We are very serious and focused on developing the national content in Uganda. The other thing is we have a robust training and development program, which we take everyone through, which is complemented by what we call borderless careers. So we are hiring Ugandans here from Uganda. We're sending them to Angola, Mozambique to train. And once they've completed that phase of the training, we'll bring them back and plug them into the project. So that's what we are doing with regard to capacity building. And when it comes to technology transfer, we are working with Makerere University, which is something we started in 2011, but we're looking to now expanding it to other institutions where we share with them some of our licenses for software such as Petrel that they can use and prepare for their working life going forward.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And it's comforting to hear that there's steps being taken to ensure that we are not staying in the outer circle, but we are getting into the inner circle as well. The earlier panel spoke about insurance and touched on certain aspects of insurance, some of the challenges that we are seeing. Maurice, from an industry perspective, do you think our current insurance requirements are fit for purpose? And what has been your experience so far? I know you haven't probably had a lot of insurance going in the development phase, but you can draw from prior experience and current experience on what you have seen so far.
Thank you, Pamela, for that question, and good evening, delegates. Insurance is a very, very vital aspect of society, and any investment or any person strategically will need some form of insurance to be able to protect himself or herself from risks that we live among. In Uganda, insurance is still a growing sector. Sector has been growing at about 11% per annum, which is one of the fastest growing sectors, but from a very low base. There was mention from one of the moderators about capacity. We are coming from a very low capacity in terms of market. Our companies are not large in comparison to other companies that operate internationally. And that's why national content was a very important aspect. We will need to build this capacity. We will definitely, through the Uganda Insurance Consortium, retain part of that risk. But the risk that is being retained locally, it's quite small in the value of the risk that we are looking at within the oil and gas. But the point here is that we will start small and grow. The aspect of insurance, of course, is always spreading the risk. So whereas we have the Uganda Insurance Consortium taking part of the risk, the other part of the risk will be reinsured in the international market. So with all of you who have quite sizable contracts, there will be mention of other companies like Munich Re. You will hear of Swiss Re. You will hear of many other reinsurance companies that will be part and parcel of your risk, but they will be in the background rather than the foreground. But they will share, they will lead in terms of making sure that the risk has been properly modeled, the terms and conditions have been thought through, and the discussions with your insurance brokers, because Minet is an insurance broker, and Minet, before it became Minet, was Aon, and there are many other subsidiary insurance brokers operating here in Uganda who also have an international flavor, and they are able to sit with you and do risk management on your risk and help you to understand the risk, understand aspects of how you mitigate, and after you mitigate, of course, then insure as required by the contract terms. Only then would you be able to be comfortable that the risk is insured. But because of the high values and because of the long tail of building capacity through capitalization, the retention from a local perspective will still be small. But having said that, there are other components of the risk that will be ably covered by the local insurance companies. Risks like workmen's compensation, risks like group life insurance, risks like medical insurance, risks like cyber insurance. All are these risks that all you as entities would have to think through with your insurance broker, understand the magnitude of the risk you carry, and put in mechanisms to manage, and thereafter transfer these to an insurance company. But the important thing is, through the National Content Forum, we will also start small, but we will grow as we enhance the oil and gas industry in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maurice. And now I turn to the last panelist before I open it to any questions that the rest of the members here might have. Brian, having said all that is said in terms of the expectations we have of the contractors that are participating in the sector, expectations from a financing perspective, insurance, is the existing legal and regulatory framework sufficient to promote value retention in your perspective? And maybe you can speak to this drawing from some of the experiences as well that you have had interacting with your clients.
Yes, thank you, Pamela, for your question. First and foremost, we do not have enough data that this legal framework is sufficient at the moment. We'll have to give it time to assess the legal framework regarding national content. However, we draw from experiences and lessons from other oil and gas producing countries where there have been success stories. Some of the success stories have come from Nigeria and Angola, and I would like to go through what Uganda has done that has followed the path that Nigeria and Ghana have set for us, that will ensure that our legal and regulatory framework in the oil and gas industry is sufficient. Firstly, Uganda enacted a specific national content laws, which is very vital if you're going to ensure that national content and value retention is sufficient. In enacting the specific legal framework, some of the aspects that have been key in national content frameworks have been three aspects. One of them is promotion of local employment, promotion of skills development and technology transfer, promotion of national industry participation, and these three aspects are embedded in our national content laws. And on looking at lessons from other oil producing countries, in order to ensure that these three aspects are successfully realized, they have followed three main principles. One of them is being the degree to which local content is embedded in sector-specific policies and legislation. The second being the degree to which the local content framework includes local content thresholds. And the third being the degree to which local content framework includes monitoring and implementation mechanisms. So in promoting local employment, skills development, and technology transfer, as well as national industry participation, these three principles have to be followed. I'll give examples in the national content law that shows that actually these three principles have been followed in Uganda's national content law. For instance, you will see that when it comes to local employment, the national content law talks about Ugandan companies and defines them being companies that are employing 70% of Ugandans, which is a clear indicator that we are promoting local employment. As you can see, it's embedded in the law, and the thresholds are also there. It also talks about labor clauses. This is why I talk about labor clauses, that if every contract, a contract of above $1 million US should have a labor clause that states that they will hire a minimum percentage of Ugandans. Though the percentage is not stated, at least it goes a long way in showing that our national content law is talking about promotion of local employment. Thirdly, another example you will see is in our national content law, it talks about, especially in the upstream content law, it talks about hiring of Ugandans that at the start of petroleum activities, in the category of support and middle-level staff, that percentage has been 95%. That's quite a big number. If you're telling all companies at the start of petroleum at the start of petroleum activities, your support and middle-level staff has to be 95%. That's a clear indicator that Uganda is at the forefront of promoting local employment. When it goes to technology transfer and skills development, they have made it. It has been clearly stated out in the national content laws that if a company or if a licensee or contractor has been approved, they have to submit what they call a detailed plan, training and recruitment plan. In the training and recruitment plan, they have to show how they are going to engage in skilling and training of Ugandans. And this plan has to be approved by PAU. So in that instance also, Uganda is on the right track. When it comes to national, when it also comes to national industry participation, you see that previous speakers have spoken about ring fencing of certain sectors in the economy. That's a clear indication that national industry participation is a big factor in our national content laws.
Okay.
Also, lastly, before I conclude, just to drive the point home, if you look at our, especially, I'm focusing more on the upstream local content framework, you see that in both the midstream and upstream local content legal framework, they talk about all licensees and contractors submitting annual national content performance reports. These reports have to be submitted every year for review by PAU. In those reports, they have to state out the following: the employment achievements in terms of hours or days worked by Ugandan citizens and foreign workers and their status. It also has to set out the Ugandan citizens trained and employed, indicating particulars by name, job, and level of training and employment. It also has to state out the procurement achievements in terms of quality of locally manufactured materials and materials of foreign origin. Then it has to state the names of Ugandan companies, Ugandan citizens, and registered entities contracted, the contracts awarded, the value of each contract awarded, and duration of the contract. And lastly, the report has to show technology transfer initiatives, research and development programs, and any training programs by the licensee. So in this, as I conclude, I'll say the national content legal framework is sufficient. We may have to wait for some years to assess the data, but as it stands, we are following the path set by Nigeria, which has been a success story in Africa. Thank you, Pamela.
Okay, thank you so much, Brian. I think I agree from the many aspects that you have covered that we have a robust framework that we are working with. I guess the test will be in the monitoring and implementation of that framework to ensure that we realize its intended objective. I want to believe we have some questions here, starting from our initial presenter, Pamela, who spoke to the bidding process at Total, and the rest of the panelists this afternoon. I hope we have microphones moving around. Let me just have your hands up if you have any questions, and I'll take about 3 questions before we can wrap this up. So there's a gentleman in pink, there's one in the middle in a black jacket and blue shirt. And then if there's one more hand, we'll take that and we'll close it.
Yes, thank you. I'm Kevin Wanyama from New Plan Limited. My question is related to Veronica from PwC, who was the panelist earlier, about the stringent conditions by the banks directed towards the local companies when they try to access funding. For example, well-audited books of accounts, which many a small company in Uganda surely does not have. What are the banks doing to lessen some of these conditions so that the local companies in Uganda can be able to access this much-needed financing and also partake in this big cake? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the second question.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Elvis HMI with Radial Circle Engineering Services.
Can you speak up, please? We're
Yeah,
struggling.
good evening. My name is Elvis HMI. I'm with Radial Circle Engineering Services. My question is to Pamela. While she was presenting, she talked about being active in the National Supplier Database as one of the challenges she's having. My question is, how do we go about that? How do we get to be active? How do we go through that process? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elvis. And the gentleman in the middle there.
Thank you very much. My name is Mukobe Isaac from Spacious Projects. My question goes to Pamela regarding the bidding process. Many speakers have spoken about the issue of joint ventures, but I would want to know from Pamela, in most bidding processes, every party in a bidding process is evaluated using the same conditions set out, just like a single contractor would be applying in terms of technical capacity, financial capacity. Now, in this situation here where we have a joint venture with a different company, are we both supposed to be evaluated based on your set out criteria, or you're going to take it in terms of percentages, local content and the content going to the international companies, assuming my joint venture partner is an international company? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Isaac. I will request Victoria to respond to the question from New Plan. I didn't get the name, around what the banks are doing, and then Pamela, you can take on the last 2 questions.
Thank you so much for that question. One thing we need to understand is that the banks have to look at your business and how you're running your business. Now, one of the things, whether you have a contract or not, is that you must have a business with proper financials. Now, we've not reached as, we are not yet saying how big is your revenue or how strong is your balance sheet. But even as a small business, you have to have the financial discipline to have your books in order, to have them audited. It may not be by the largest audit firms, but how are the banks going to get that comfort that you're actually running your business and you will be able to execute on this contract? They are relying on you to drive your business, to be in charge. So they will ask for things like financials, which have to be in order. They will ask for things like your CRB report to look at your credit history. And they are trying to gauge and see, can I take this risk? Even if there is a strong contract in place, but never mind that the employer is actually saying, the bank, please take the risk. So the bank has things that really they have to look at as minimum requirements. And some of those are financials. They don't have to be the strongest of them, but at least let them be properly audited and properly kept. So in conclusion, what I'm saying is that the banks will look at the business, the underlying business, even without the contract. How have you been running it? What is the management profile like? And what is your history of performance? And I think those are things that have to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Pamela.
Okay, I'll start with the first question. So the question was, how do you get your entity registered to the National Supplier Database? So if you visit the website for the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, you'll find all the requirements listed on the website, which you should have a read and then submit the application. It's an online application, and it's as simple as that. So typically, I don't want to enumerate them and miss something. I want to encourage you to go and have a look so that you have an exhaustive knowledge of what's required. But typically, they'll be asking who you are, so your articles and memorandum of association as a company. Could you share your tax position, so your latest tax returns? They'll be asking to know your contacts, your offices, where you are, and the range of services you're going to provide. Once you provide all this information, the authority will have a read, review, get back to you if they have any questions. If the whole application is fully constituted, they will acknowledge by giving you a reference number and then get back to you informing you that your entity is registered. You can as well go online. There is a register that you can check to see that your entity is registered. The validity of the registration is normally 3 years, renewable. So it's upon you as an entity to be diligent to make sure that you update your company details, but also when it's expired, you reach out to the Petroleum Authority of Uganda to renew that. The second question was related to the JVs. The question, if I get it right, let me know if I've not rightfully paraphrased it. Basically, you want to know if you're a joint venture between a foreign entity and a Ugandan, how you evaluated as a JV in a bidding process. Am I right?
Says yes.
Oh, okay. Is that it? Okay, perfect. So the first step is when you approach us as a JV, we want to have some sort of document to help us understand your marriage, which comes in the form of a consortium agreement, or name it a memorandum of understanding, or you can approach a lawyer to help you with that. We want to see that to understand how are you going to relate, who is going to do what, who is taking lead. Remember the genesis of joint ventures is also regulated. So in other words, we expect that you're coming together to strengthen something. So we want to know what that is. Is it technical? Is it financial? Is it, I don't know. So you need to articulate that in the document. That will be a starting point to start evaluating the joint venture against the scope that has been tendered. Most times, the consortium agreement will be structured around the scope of requirements that has been issued to the public. Once we get an understanding of how you want to work together, then we will evaluate you as a joint venture. Obviously, looking at each individual company in the joint venture to see the strength and then to see the areas you are intending to work together and whether it delivers what we are expecting. So when we ask, for example, for an execution plan, we don't expect 2 execution plans if you're 2 entities and a JV. No, it's 1 execution plan because we expect you to be working together. However, there are certain aspects that you might want to submit individually as entities because it's a legal requirement. For example, are you compliant in terms of tax remission? We expect the tax returns for both entities unless you're an incorporated joint venture that has 1 set of tax returns. If not the case, we'd expect to see certain documentation each of the entities has to submit for purposes of us appreciating that you are compliant. So, tax returns, NSSF remissions, etc., as I listed them. For the other aspects where you came together to work together, we expect 1 set of documents that we shall evaluate. On the national content aspect, I'll close off with that. What we expect when you come together is how are you maximizing this, which is the theme of what we're talking about. You have a foreign entity and a Ugandan entity coming together. Perfect. So how does it look in terms of technology transfer? Is there anything that's going to be transferred from one entity to the other? Is there any capacity building initiative that you're setting up, having come together? We want to see the value proposition. So in fact, more than ever, when you're a joint venture, we really want to see that. So yes, your national content plan would be, it's a joint exercise that you need to develop as together and presented as one plan. I hope I've addressed your questions. But if you need more information, we can talk after this. You can as well come over to our offices and we can dig deeper into that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Pamela. I'm afraid we have to end it here. Luckily, I didn't see any other hands going up, so I believe we have addressed all the questions. But also, when I was being initiated into this role of hosting events, I was told that you have to pay attention to your audience or to read your audience. So I can clearly tell that we are tired and we need to take a break or end the day here. I would like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for staying on until this time. I know it's been a very action-packed day, but I believe it's been for a good cause because the information that we have received here, the interaction that we have had was truly, truly, truly needed. It's perfect timing for us. We'll continue these conversations tomorrow. We have an equally packed program for the day. If you will have a look at your programs, we will be starting or resuming at 9 a.m. in the morning. So I'd like to request that you're here in time so that we can listen to our Tier 1 contractors. We're going to be having McDermott, Sinopec speaking to us. We're going to be having different teams from Woolly, ICS again, and a number of others that will then bring it down to experiences at the Tier 1 contractor level, engaging with subcontractors or Tier 2, Tier 3 contractors. And in fact, we're going to have breakout sessions tomorrow that are going to be in the different halls that will be communicated to you. And in these sessions, we're going to have these different Tier 1 contractors breaking down specific aspects of their own expectations. How do you win and optimize opportunities at Tier 3 level? So there's going to be many interesting things that we're going to listen to tomorrow. Thank you so much to our panelists this afternoon again, and please do feel free to speak to them, run after them as they head out, catch them at the coffee area. Make sure that any questions that have not been addressed here are addressed there. And a big round of applause once again to our sponsors, Stanbic, UNOC, Total, CNOC, Equity, the Oil and Gas, the Insurance Association, and many others, as you have seen them over there. We do appreciate. One last announcement. There's a cocktail, but it's only for the sponsors and partners in Katonga Hall. If you'd like to interact, share a little bit more about what was happening today and future opportunities, please take advantage of that. And this has been sponsored by the people that I've just mentioned, Stanbic, Total, CNOC, UNOC, and Equity. So thank you so much once again. Have a lovely evening and see you tomorrow morning.
To move your business to the next level. Now it's all a breeze with Centenary Bank's Letters of Credit. A letter of credit is issued by the bank for the account of the buyer who is the applicant to pay the beneficiary provided terms of the letter of credit are met. Centenary Bank also offers bank guarantees such as bid security or bid bonds, performance bonds, and many other types of guarantees. We also offer you timely unsecured bid bonds up to a certain agreed amount to enable you bid for contracts. You can also boost your export and import trade activities with shipping finance. It doesn't matter if it is post-shipment or pre-shipment finance. And that's not all. Support your cash flows when you trade on credit terms with our invoice discounting and LPO finance facilities. Now that you know about our trade finance products, what are you waiting for? Centenary Bank, our bank. Terms and conditions apply.
Growing is natural. It's something that defines our journey.
solid professional engineering foundation gained from several projects in various parts of Africa. Today, we are a leader in Uganda's engineering and infrastructure sector, applying global solutions in the delivery of local projects that are sustainable, reliable, effective, and grounded to quality. We have gained this through high-profile consultants assignments in sectors such as oil and gas, transportation, built environment, power and renewable energy, water, environmental and social considerations. With strategic partnerships, we are building a close network of both local and international associate companies. We are engineering the Ugandan future. ICS, delivering sustainable and appropriate local solutions with global expertise.
In March 2018, Total Energies launched the Welders Training and Certification Program aimed at improving the employability of Ugandans from the Albertine region and East African crude oil pipeline areas.
GIZ E4D project is working with Total Energies, where we are targeting to train at the end of it 350 welders, and we're expected to train more.
I see myself working maybe in the oil and gas industry, being an international certified welder, because I have acquired the skills.
I'm a lady, but doing something which is generally perceived to be for men. It makes you actually feel special. It makes you feel wow.
I am ready to support the oil and gas sector by being a quality welder. I thank you, Total, and I thank the government of Uganda.
Total Energies EP Uganda is committed to the empowerment of Ugandans to take an active part in the overall development of the oil project in Uganda. In March 2018, Total Energies launched the Welders Training and Certification Program aimed at improving the employability of Ugandans from the Albertine region and East African crude oil pipeline areas.
GIZ E4D project is working with Total Energies, where we are targeting to train at the end of it 350 welders, and we're expected to train more.
I see myself working maybe in the oil and gas industry, being an international certified welder.
In all its operations worldwide, Total Energies considers national content a key component for the success of its operations.
Over 94% of the overall workforce are Ugandans, and we continue to recruit and mobilize more and more. Around 8,000 Ugandan nationals will directly contribute to Tilanga project only. More than $700 million is expected to be really spent in Uganda for these local goods and services. Already more than 160 Ugandan companies directly involved in our project.
This strategy was developed in line with the national content regulations of Uganda.
As PAU, we would like to recognize Total Energies, E&P, for their efforts in employing, training, and skilling Ugandans.
Total Energies EP Uganda is committed to the empowerment of Ugandans to take an active part in the overall development of the oil project in Uganda. Total Energies has undertaken a number of initiatives aimed at ensuring that Ugandan entities and citizens are adequately equipped to participate in the oil and gas sector.
We are contracted by Total Energies and its subcontractors to supply them skilled manpower, which they deploy at the respective projects. They are also going to work through us to begin to train many Ugandans around skills that are required to supply the oil industry. Because we're already working with Total in Uganda, we had so many suitors from Europe, Dubai, and the USA of potential manpower companies that wanted to actually enter partnership with True North.
Total Energies EP Uganda is committed to the empowerment of Ugandans to take an active part in the overall development of the oil project in Uganda.
Tomorrow. Tomorrow has a way of sometimes surprising by presenting things that you certainly weren't expecting today. Africa's tomorrow. Our future is predictable. Billions are being invested in infrastructure. Our middle class is growing. Agricultural sectors are thriving. The world is looking to us to replenish their energy and mineral resources. Our entrepreneurs are making their mark on the world. Today in Africa, a prosperous future can be assured if the risks of tomorrow are secured. Meeting the uncertainties of tomorrow is our everyday business. For 70 years, we have helped manage risks and secure the growth of the continent. We've been there as risk advisors for farmers, for governments and investors building infrastructure vital for growth, for power grids that power economies, for mines that are the treasure trove of our resources, settling claims for properties destroyed by fire, for employers and employees who want to secure their health and retirement benefits, protecting businesses against the threat of cybercrime, data loss, and other risks. We've been there as risk advisors for all of life's unpredictable moments. Our business stands on 3 pillars: risk, reinsurance, and people. For 70 years, we've been an agile, trusted advisor to clients who want custom and homegrown solutions rather than conventional offerings. Our values are at the heart of our business and our relationships: honesty, expertise, agility, respect, teamwork. We are Aon's trusted global network correspondent in Africa. We are Minet. For every one of the thousands of businesses and people we serve, and for many of life's unpredictable moments, our purpose is clear. We partner with you to secure tomorrow.
Angela?
Yes, Mommy.
What did you wish for?
I want to be a pilot.
I want you to fly, fly so high in the sky. And
when shall we make her have more realistic dreams?
We don't kill dreams, we build on them.
'Cause you're a star, dreams come true. Dreams come true. For me and
Mama, I thought our dreams would change. I don't want to disappoint my cousin Nene.
These little things we do today take us one step closer.
Whether all you have is just a dream, we are ready to walk that journey with you until it's your reality. With us, you're one step closer to achieving your dream. Stanbic Bank. It can.
Our Ugandan story isn't a new one. It's